What can you feed your family when you are on a really tight budget and you don't have much money at all to work with? That's what we're going to talk about in today's video. Now, if you do a search on YouTube, you can find a lot of different videos talking about poverty meals, and that's sort of what we're going to be talking about today. I don't love calling them poverty meals. It sounds a little bit depressing. I'd rather say frugal meals, because whether you are in really tough circumstances or not, these are meals that are just good frugal meals to have in the back of your mind so that you have some things that won't cost a lot that you can still make for your family. In today's video, we're going to talk about some of the basic ingredients that you're going to want to have on hand when you have hardly any money to work with. And then we're going to talk about some specific meals that you can make. Now, I'm not a nutritionist, and this video is not intended to be a guide for how to feed your family really nutritious meals. The whole point of this video is, what can you feed your family that is going to fill them up, that's going to satisfy them when you have hardly any money to work with? So with that being said, let's start by talking about some of the ingredients that you are going to want to get that are really, really cheap that will help you to fill everyone up. One would be pasta. You can get pasta for $1 a box, and you can use one box of pasta and that will work for a whole meal, obviously with some other ingredients, but pasta is a very filling option. Another important ingredient that is filling and cheap is potatoes, especially around the holidays, like with Thanksgiving coming up. You can see sales for like a big bag, a 10-pound bag of potatoes for only a couple bucks. So watch for those sales, because potatoes are a great ingredient that you can do a lot with that will fill up your family. Of course, rice is another important ingredient. Rice is very inexpensive. Look for the actual dried rice, not instant rice. Instant rice is going to cost you quite a good bit more, and it's really not difficult to cook just normal rice. So whether it's brown rice or white rice or whatever your favorite variety is, just get the regular, don't get the instant, and you'll save a lot of money. And again, rice is another very filling ingredient. And of course, bread, especially when you have kids, bread is a great way to fill their bellies. Obviously, bread is great for things like sandwiches, but also as a side for soups and stuff like that. It's a great filler. I know we ate a lot of bread when I was a kid, and kids love bread, so that is definitely a great thing to have on hand. Obviously, the four things I just mentioned, pasta, potatoes, bread, and rice, those are all carbs, which you might be thinking, I'm trying to avoid those things, I'm trying to be healthy, I'm trying to lose weight, or whatever. And I totally get that, and I know that in general, we don't want to be filling our bodies all the time with carbs. But if you are in a situation, a poverty situation, or a situation where you just have very little left in the budget, your priority is just filling the bellies of your family. And so carbs are going to go a long way to help you be able to stretch your meat or stretch some of your other ingredients and fill up on some of those things like potatoes and rice and stuff. There are a lot of things that you can do with beans. I usually get black beans, but of course there are all variety of beans depending on what you like. I like to have canned beans available for different recipes. It's very convenient, and you can get them on sale for very inexpensive. I think they're normally around 90 cents a can at like an Aldi, but sometimes you can get them on sale for less than that. So keep an eye out for those sales when you can stock up on your beans. But if I'm going to just do a meal like beans and rice, where I'm not just throwing the beans in something else, but the beans are kind of the main thing, I really prefer cooking my own beans. And that's going to be cheaper for you too. You can buy a pound of dried beans at Walmart for about $1.50. I have it written down here. It's $1.50 for black beans, just $1 for pinto beans for a whole pound of the dried beans. And they're not as hard to cook as you might think. What I do, and everyone might cook them a different way, but I will put them in a pot, fill it with water, bring it to a boil, and then immediately turn it off and cover it and let those sit for an hour. So they just soak, and then you drain out the water, fill it with more water till they're covered, and then you just let them simmer for several hours until they're nice and soft. You don't want to do a super fast boil, because that makes the skins peel off. I mean, they'll still taste fine, but they just don't look quite as nice. So you just kind of want to do a soft, like a low simmer, and just let them go for a couple of hours till they're nice and soft. I always add salt, obviously. You need a good bit of salt with your dry beans to get a good flavor when you're cooking them. But then other than that, you can be creative. Sometimes if I have onions, I'll chop them up and put them in there, or I will do onion powder. You could do garlic powder or minced garlic. You could do cumin if you like that spice in there, or some chili powder. So whatever flavors you prefer with your beans, just throw it in there. Make sure you always have enough liquid so they don't burn. But other than that, it's super easy to cook your own beans. And when they are the main part of your dish, like beans and rice or a meal like that, they really taste better when you cook your own. So let's talk some specific meals that you can make. For a meal like beans and rice, like I said, I prefer black beans, so I would pay $1.50 for a bag of black beans, about $1 for a bag of rice. Actually, I see here it's just 88 cents at Walmart, so less than $1 for a bag of rice. And so there I have a whole meal for under $2.50. So that is a very inexpensive meal for a family. And that's a pound of rice, a pound of beans. That's totally going to feed a family, probably with leftovers, depending on how big of eaters you have. Now, if you're able to spend a little more, we like to have corn on our beans and rice, and you can get that for about $1 for a bag of the frozen corn, 50 cents sometimes if you are getting the canned corn. So you're still having a meal for $3, maybe $3.50 total. So that is a very inexpensive meal. That is surprisingly good. Another easy meal is grilled cheese. So I wrote down here, we can get sliced cheese at Walmart for $1.84. That would be for 12 slices. Bread, their cheapest bread, is $1.42. So that's the bread and cheese for the meal for just a little over $3. And then if you want to throw in a veggie, you can get a bag of carrots at Walmart for about $1, or you can get a couple cucumbers for about $1 total. So it's just, you know, $1 more for your veggies and you have a simple meal. A couple weeks ago, Pablo was gone for dinner, and so I just made a big pot of oatmeal for the kids and me. The kids were happy, it was filling, it was delicious, and it was cheap. So a big 32 ounce of oats will cost you $4.12 at Walmart. And that is about 12 cups of oats. It says it's 12 cups. I've always found it's a little bit less than that. But when I make a pot of oatmeal, I use maybe 3 cups. And so I'm only using about a fourth of that. So it's coming out to about $1 or something for the oats for a meal. And then I usually add brown sugar. Brown sugar is $2.22 for a bag, and I'm only using, I don't know, like just a little bit of the bag, an eighth of the bag, probably less than that. It's not that much sugar. I didn't quite figure it out, but at any rate, it's like cents. You know, it's not even $1 for the amount of brown sugar I'm using. It's just cents. So that is a very cheap meal. We're talking like less than $2 for the pot of oatmeal. You don't even need milk for oatmeal if you don't have it on hand. The oats actually, I feel like, cook up better in water. They get kind of more gooey in milk. So I usually like to cook them in water, and then we add milk when I serve it. But if you don't have milk on hand, the oatmeal does turn out okay with just water. Going right along with sort of the breakfast for dinner idea, we can't forget about eggs. Now, the last couple years, like, eggs really skyrocketed in price, and I was like, oh man, this is not really a cheap meal anymore. But lately, they've definitely come back down. So the price I have here, when I checked yesterday, eggs are $2.92 for a dozen at Walmart. So more expensive than they used to be several years ago, but much cheaper than they were like at this time last year. So $2.92 for a dozen eggs is definitely cheaper than buying a cut of meat or something like that. So a simple meal can just be making a whole pan of scrambled eggs and then doing some bread on the side. If you use a dozen eggs, you're spending $2.92. A loaf of the cheapest bread is $1.42. So again, that's about $4.50 for a meal. When I was younger, sometimes we would get a whole bunch of bread that was like just about ready to expire. There was a place we were able to go where they would just get all this bread that was being donated because they couldn't sell it at that point, but it wasn't bad yet. But some of it was maybe just like not quite as fresh, not quite as soft anymore. So sometimes what my mom would do is she would cut up that bread and add like some eggs and a little bit of milk, maybe a little butter, I don't remember exactly, but she would just throw that in a 9x13 pan and make sort of like a French toast bake. And we would have that for a meal, like we would have that for lunch. We didn't have any sort of meat on the side or anything. That was just the meal, and us kids loved it. And with all that bread and some eggs in there too, it was filling, it was cheap, and we were all happy. So that is another idea, especially if you have access to bread that is maybe a little older, not bad, but a little bit more dry and you want a way to use it up. Of course, we can't forget about spaghetti. Like I mentioned, pasta is a great way to fill bellies. You can usually get it for like $1 a box regularly, and then sometimes there will be sales like at Kroger where you can get it for like 50 cents a box. And if you are able, stock up when it is cheaper. I know that there might not be always the money there to stock up, and I totally understand that. I've been there. But when you are able to stock up at those prices, then you're really, really getting a good deal. But for pasta, for spaghetti, if you're paying about 98 cents, $1 a box, then you can get a can of spaghetti sauce for around $1.50 usually. And there's a meal right there, $2.50 for a meal. If you want to add in some meat to your sauce, you could do two different things. You could do ground beef. Now ground beef, I feel like keeps going up in price, but lately like the cheapest sale price at Kroger that I'm seeing is $3.99 a pound. And so, I mean, that would be adding $4 right there to your meal, but you wouldn't have to do a whole pound. You could just do half a pound and add that to your sauce, and it's still giving it more texture, giving it more flavor, and adding in some protein. And you can save the other half pound for another meal. Or if you want a little bit more meat, you could opt for ground turkey instead. Ground turkey does take a little bit of getting used to, I think, if you're used to just using ground beef, because it has a slightly different flavor. But I think if you also add some seasonings when you're browning it, you can get it to taste a little bit better or a little bit more like ground beef. And ground turkey is running at about $1.98 a pound at Walmart. So definitely cheaper by at least half, if not more, than ground beef. So ground turkey is definitely a good option to consider if you want to get the meat in there without spending so much. Quesadillas can be a good option. Cheese, of course, can be a little bit pricey, but you can still feed your family pretty cheaply when you're just using tortillas and cheese and maybe a veggie. So tortillas are $1.98 for a package. Cheese, you can get a package, like the 2-cup package for $1.97. You're gonna spend less overall when you're able to buy cheese bulk. But if you're in a pinch and you're just using the money that you have, 2 cups of cheese is normally going to be enough to make multiple quesadillas. So you'd be spending $2 on your tortillas, about $2 on your cheese. So that would come out to $4 there. And then if you want to add in a veggie, that is another $1 if you just buy the basic frozen veggies or a bag of carrots or something like that. So that would be a $5 meal. Another option when you're talking about quesadillas is to add in a can of beans. That is going to add up your protein, of course, and it's going to make them more filling, and it'll stretch the cheese too. So again, a can of beans is going to be less than $1. So if you add those in with the cheese, that will definitely make your meal a little more filling and make it stretch a little farther. Okay, we've hardly even talked about meals with meat here. Let's talk about chicken. Chicken is one of the cheapest proteins you can get, but it can still be pricey. And if you don't have much money to work with, it can be hard to justify buying a whole thing of chicken breasts and using them all for one meal. That can feel really pricey. So I looked at the price for a whole chicken. Now we have a Costco membership right now. We got a good deal on it last year, and so we have that membership. And that is really the cheapest place I can get chickens, because their rotisserie chickens are already cooked. They're only $5 and they're pretty big, which is a really great deal. But if you're really pinched for money, you probably don't have a Costco membership and you probably don't have access to those. So I looked at the price at Walmart right now for one of their whole chickens, and the price is an average of about $7.62 for a chicken. And I think that's for about like a 5.5 pound chicken. So usually when I buy a chicken from Walmart, I can get at least 7 cups of chicken from that whole chicken once I have cooked it and shredded the chicken. Sometimes a little more than that, but just thinking, I'm getting 7 cups. I went ahead and divided that price, $7.62, by the 7 cups, and that comes out to $1.08 a cup for a cup of shredded chicken. So something to look for when you're trying to save money is look for recipes that don't call for a whole bunch of chicken. So we're not talking about, a baked chicken recipe or a recipe where you have to use multiple chicken breasts. We're talking about casseroles or soups or things where it just calls for a smaller amount of like shredded or chopped chicken. So I've found multiple recipes over the years that only call for 2 cups of chicken and they feed an entire family. So those are the kind of recipes you want to be looking for. Of course, soups are a good idea when you're trying to stretch your meat. 2 cups of chicken does not sound like very much for soup, but if you're making like a veggie soup, you can really add a lot of veggies in there, and then you're throwing in the 2 cups of chicken to add flavor and add a little bit of meat, but it's not really the main part of the soup. The same thing goes for like a white chili or even like a taco soup or something like that. If you add extra beans, then you don't have to add as much meat and you'll get by with just 2 cups of chicken. Another recipe that I made recently that only called for 2 cups of chicken is chicken spaghetti. And I'll be sure to link any recipes that I talk about in the description box so that you can check them out. But I follow the Pioneer Woman's recipe for chicken spaghetti, except I leave out a lot of the extra stuff that my kids don't like. So I just make it very simply with a box of spaghetti. I think it's even a little bit less than a pound of spaghetti, but you're just going to be spending, $1 on that. Calls for 2 cups of chicken, a couple cans of cream of chicken soup or cream of mushroom soup, which is not very expensive, and some onion. And I'll have to check the recipe, but I think it's not much more than that, especially if you leave out like mushrooms or peppers or whatever else they have in there that my kids don't like. But it is a very inexpensive recipe. It makes a whole 9 by 13. It fed my whole family and we had plenty of leftovers. So recipes like that are a great way to stretch your chicken. I'm sorry, I've got a little fly flying around in here. I also have a recipe for these chicken and cheese stuffed biscuits. That recipe also only calls for 2 cups of chicken. It's enough to feed a family, and that is very inexpensive. You just need your 2 cups of chicken, some cheese, and then some of those canned biscuits, which you can get fairly inexpensively when they are like a store brand. And again, I will link that recipe in the description. Another recipe that only calls for 2 cups of chicken is chicken enchiladas. The first time I made them, I was like, how am I gonna fill like 10 tortillas with only 2 cups of chicken? But I've made it with just the 2 cups and it turns out great. You don't feel like you don't have enough filling. Somehow the 2 cups just stretch and it works fine. When I have more chicken on hand, I'll add 2.5 cups, maybe even 3 cups. But following the recipe as is, it turns out really great. And again, for 2 cups of chicken, I'm only spending like $2.15 or something like that. Another recipe I just thought about that only takes a little bit of chicken would be like a chicken fried rice. So I usually use brown rice, but of course you can use white rice or whatever you have on hand. But you're gonna want something that's already cooked. And usually it's great to use leftover rice because it's cold. And so then you can pull it out and quickly fry it up and it's not gonna get all mushy. But if you add in an egg or 2 to your fried rice, then you can add just a cup or 2 of chicken. And it's a great meal to stretch the chicken. The chicken is still giving plenty of flavor. If you have onions, which are cheap, add a lot of onion in there for flavor. And that can be a really filling meal that doesn't use all that much chicken. We already talked just briefly about ground beef and substituting turkey for it if you don't mind that flavor difference, because turkey is at least half the price of ground beef. But either way, whether you use ground beef or turkey, there are a lot of great recipes out there that will feed a whole family that only call for 1 pound of ground turkey or ground beef. I'm not going to go through all of those right now, but I will be sure to link some of those recipes in the description box too, so you can see those. But I love that I can still, even with our family of 7, make some recipes where I'm only using 1 pound of ground beef or ground turkey, and it is plenty for a whole meal. Another meal idea, and I know I'm kind of jumping back and forth between all of these random meals, but another meal idea is hot dogs. Like I said, this is not a nutrition guide. We are just talking about filling up the bellies. And if you get basic hot dogs, I'm not talking about nice beef hot dogs or fancier brands, but just the basic hot dogs, sometimes you can get them as low as $1 a package. So you can get your hot dogs for around $1. You can get your buns for probably more like $1.50 now, but that's $2.50 for a meal. Or you can grab your hot dogs and you can add them to a can of beans. Probably not black beans, but whatever kind of beans you like to have with hot dogs. I don't know, is it normally baked beans that people do more with hot dogs? I don't even know because I'm not a huge baked bean person, but I know that that is a really cheap meal that you can do that a lot of people like, having like your baked beans with hot dogs cut up in them. Oh, and we can't forget lentils. If you're getting a little tired of beans, maybe you've been doing a lot of beans and rice and stuff, you can switch things up with lentils. I'm gonna see if I can find a link to a lentil recipe that's similar to the one my mom makes. I don't think she has a link for it. It's just a recipe that she's had for a long time. But growing up, she would make a lentil recipe that had cheese on top. I'm not sure what all the ingredients were, but it was just a super simple recipe. And I remember it just being really flavorful. I need to get it from her because I've been wanting to make it. So I need to ask her. And if I can find a similar recipe, I will link it for you. But lentils are definitely a great option that are cheap like beans, and they're a little bit different if you need some variety. Okay, one more thing, we can't forget about peanut butter. Peanut butter is a really great source of protein and it's relatively inexpensive. So I forgot to check the price of this before I started this video, but this is a 40 ounce and I'm thinking it's normally around $3. I'll have to check. If I'm way off, I'll put the correct amount on the screen. But peanut butter is a great price for the protein, the amount of protein you're getting, and a big jar like this is gonna make a lot of meals for you. I know that a peanut butter sandwich might not be the most exciting meal in the world, but it's filling, it's gonna give you your protein, it's gonna give you your carbs, and it will fill you and your kids up. Obviously, peanut butter and jelly is a classic combination, but if you don't want as much sugar with the jelly, you could just do plain peanut butter sandwiches, or my kids like to do peanut butter with banana. And then you're getting some fruit in there too. And bananas are relatively inexpensive, especially when you're cutting them up and just putting some slices on a sandwich. Okay, I know I'm missing some things. I'm probably gonna end this video and think, wow, I totally missed some of those really obvious, basic, cheap meals. So if you can think of something that obvious that I missed, or something that you like to make for your family when you're on a tight budget, please let me know in the comments. I'm sure other people would love to read your comments and get some of your good ideas. I know that times are tough, especially in recent years with inflation and everything like that. And now with some uncertainty for folks who are on like the SNAP benefits. And so I hope that this video was helpful to give you some ideas. Again, if you have even better ideas or think of something I forgot, let other people know in the comments so they can get some more help in finding good and cheap things that they can feed their families. Okay, you guys, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you watching my videos. I hope this was helpful for you. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and I will see you again soon in my next video. Bye.